The novel revolves around a high-profile kidnapping case at the James Michaels Institute for Learning, where detectives Gordon and Evan, typically tasked with homicides, are called in due to the severity of the situation. 4 children have been taken, heightening tensions and prompting a massive police response led by Lieutenant Sachs. As the detectives delve into the investigation, interviewing witnesses and staff, an unexpected encounter occurs when a determined and striking woman, Miss Parker, forcefully bypasses security at the school in her desperate search for her kidnapped daughter. Miss Parker's fierce determination and physical prowess, demonstrated when she easily breaks free from an officer's grasp, catch Detective Gordon off guard. Despite the chaos, her focus remains unwavering in her pursuit to locate her child. Unbeknownst to Gordon initially, Miss Parker becomes a central figure in the unfolding drama as her actions lead her to the Devil's Horn, a seedy bar on the outskirts of town, where she seemingly follows a lead. Detective Gordon, intrigued and concerned by Miss Parker's involvement, secretly observes her conducting a methodical search, which includes stopping at various points as if sensing or tracking something. Eventually, her efforts pay off, and she zeroes in on a dilapidated apartment building. Gordon, torn between protocol and concern, reluctantly follows her into a dangerous situation where he discovers Miss Parker has single-handedly confronted and neutralized criminals tied to the kidnapping ring. Miss Parker's actions, though heroic in rescuing the abducted children, also involve violent confrontations that result in fatalities among the gang members. This complicates matters for the detectives and law enforcement, as they must reconcile her vigilantism with the legal system. Despite his reservations, Detective Gordon can't deny the magnetic pull Miss Parker exerts, and finds himself empathetic to her plight as a mother pushed to extremes. The narrative also touches on the aftermath of these events, detailing the personal cost to Gordon, who suffers a serious injury during the course of the case. He survives but faces physical rehabilitation and an early retirement forced upon him by his superiors, who are uncomfortable with the media attention surrounding him. Throughout, Gordon's life takes a dramatic turn, intertwined with the Parker family, particularly Miss Parker and her daughter Marika, who become a source of solace amidst his professional upheaval. In summary, the novel combines elements of crime thriller, character study, and emotional drama, exploring themes of parental love, the boundaries of justice, and the consequences of taking the law into one's own hands. It presents a tense, fast-paced narrative driven by the dual pursuits of justice and personal redemption. Chapter 1. This is a mess, Evan said. Reporters, worried parents, and more congregated outside the gates of the James Michaels Institute for Learning, and we had to slow down, wait for the officers on the scene to clear a path, and only then could we enter. Detectives. One of the officers nodded at us, and I nodded back, gestured for Evan to park the car in the first open spot. The number of officers around the school was impressive, and their number would only increase over the following hours. It wasn't every day there was a high-profile kidnapping in a school. I breathed out in a sigh, my legs trembling just slightly. It always happened before I started working on a case where people's lives were at risk, and this time there were children in danger. From what we had been told over the radio, 4 kids had been taken. What are we even doing here? Evan asked, more to himself than anyone else. We're homicide. I didn't answer him. Both of us knew why. This was a case that needed all hands on deck, where speed would be of the essence. Even if we only interrogated some of the workers, the ones who at most only got a glimpse of the kidnappers, we would be helping. More officers waited at the entrance to the building, and they eyed us for a few moments, studying our identification before letting us through and indicating the path we should follow. Everyone was tense, and it was noticeable. It didn't take us long to find the man in charge. Lieutenant Sachs hadn't been in the field for almost a decade. I knew that for fact. He was too busy leading his department, but no one had ever doubted he was good at his job. I had only met him a couple of times, and he always left a good impression. He recognized me and gestured for the 2 of us to approach. After dismissing the officer with him, Gordon, Jameson, he greeted me first, then my partner. We're going to need you to interview quite a few people. I nodded. That was what I had been expecting. What can you tell us so far, Lieutenant? Only the basics, I'm afraid. The older man sighed, absently reached up and rubbed his brows, a sign of tension and tiredness. Things would get worse. Before they got better, the case had only started. Some jacked up thugs invaded the place, grabbed 4 kids from one of the classrooms, and killed a couple of security guards on their way out. Shit. Evan swore. I closed my eyes, fearing for the children. If the kidnappers had already killed, there was no reason to think they wouldn't kill again, and this time their target could be one of the kids. And there's more. The older man continued with the tone of voice of someone that knew the worst was still to come. One of the kids they took was the mayor's nephew. Was he the target? I didn't think there was any reason for anyone to target the mayor's nephew specifically. Mayor Rollins was well liked in the city, and he hadn't taken any decisions that could be considered controversial in years. We can't say for sure, though. Why take the rest of the kids if he was? What are we working with here then? Evan asked. Some random group just hit the school in search of rich kids to take. That wasn't impossible, even if I didn't think it was likely. James Michaels was the place where the rich and powerful sent their kids to learn. Almost certainly the children would be worth quite a bit in ransom, but I couldn't help but think the whole operation seemed sloppy. Killing people unnecessarily always complicated things, and the amount of publicity an attack like this would make it almost impossible for the kidnappers to escape. Didn't mean the kids would be safe and sound, but it made it very hard for the ones that took them to get away with it. We do this from the ground up, no conjectures, no guessing. Get everything of use out of the witnesses. I want you to interrogate everything they glimpsed of the kidnappers. I want to know about the kids, their families, every rumor. Then we'll worry why those kids were taken. Evan made to open his mouth, but I shook my head at him and he fell silent. He needed to understand we weren't in charge of this case. We might not even stay in it for long. With all the publicity involved, with the kids involved, it wouldn't be long until some other agency took charge. Besides, this wasn't like our usual investigations. It was one thing to help question witnesses, quite another to investigate a case outside of our area of expertise. It didn't take long for us to get to our first witness, who we questioned in one of the classrooms from the school. He was one of the janitors who supposedly took a glimpse of the kidnappers when they were moving out. He didn't have much to say. They were well covered. He didn't get much of a look at them. The following witnesses were more or less the same, though slowly we could form a picture of the attackers. There had been 5 of them. They spoke with a Hispanic accent and they seemed nervous. Could be both good and bad. If they were visibly nervous, that meant they didn't have much experience with kidnappings, could more easily have made a mistake, but then they might very easily do something everyone would regret as well. I couldn't help but think I was lucky I wouldn't be the one expected to solve this mess. A couple of hours of this case, and I was already tired as I hadn't been in weeks. A sigh escaped my mouth and I stretched, knowing there were still a few people to question, but hoping we could take a break for a few minutes. And then we heard a loud voice coming from the corridor outside. We exchanged glances before moving at once, my hand falling atop my holster at the same time. With so many police officers around, it was almost impossible to think anyone with bad intentions had gotten into the school, but one could never know for sure. The voice got even louder. Miss, stop right now or I'll be forced to detain you. Those words, we didn't hesitate. I exchanged a glance with Evan and both of us moved at once. It didn't take me long to see what the commotion was about. One of the officers that had been on the school's entrance was gripping a woman's arm. She had her back to me. I couldn't see her well, but it was easy to see she was pissed. And then she pulled, easily broke the grip the officer had on her. He stumbled and fell down, and she kept moving forward without a word. The sight of her made me freeze for a moment. She was gorgeous. Sharp cheekbones and chin, soft pink lips, wild green eyes. One look at her and I froze, my blood rushing through my veins, making me feel things I hadn't in a long time. I shook myself out of it when I saw Evan advance. I liked my partner. He was usually reliable, but it wasn't exactly rare for him to be impulsive. Grabbed his arm before he could do something problematic. He blinked at me and I shook my head at him. When I looked back at the woman, her eyes were on me, and I felt my mouth getting dry. My heartbeat skyrocketed as she approached and my eyes dipped down. I found myself appreciating her clothes and the way they clung to her body. There was no denying the woman was curvaceous, and one glance at her arms showed she was quite athletic as well. She had far more muscle there than I did. Not quite knowing what to do, I just watched her come. Are you the one in charge here? Her voice felt like velvet against my skin, and I shivered. I'm in charge. Lieutenant Sachs's voice came from further ahead of their position, and I almost looked at him. I only didn't because of the green eyes fixed on mine. It was as if those orbs held me in place, held me prisoner, and I only truly got free of them when the brunette deigned to look at the lieutenant. Who are you? The woman didn't answer him immediately, simply tilted her head, took a few steps towards the older man. She was just as gorgeous from behind, and I let my eyes wander from her light brown hair down, stifled a sound at how form-fitting her dress was against her ass. This was a woman who was hot as hell, and knew it, and she had no problem flaunting it. Miss Parker, I'm so sorry for this. The hurried woman that came from behind the lieutenant seemingly broke the tension that had been building up, and I found myself relaxing just slightly. What happened to my daughter? That velvety voice made me shiver once more. But this time in something like dread. I wasn't the only one that reacted to. Evan tensed again, the lieutenant the same, though that reaction was nothing compared to the woman that I now realized must have been the principal, who paled so much I feared she would faint on the spot. I licked my lips as I wondered if I should intervene. On one side I could understand the brunette's reaction. I didn't know how I would react if my daughter was kidnapped, and from her reaction her daughter had been one of the kids taken. Nonetheless, it wasn't as if the principal would be able to do much to help the brunette, and I found myself moving forward trying to intervene. Miss Parker, it seems. My voice came stronger than I was expecting it to, and I trailed off a little when her eyes moved to me. I couldn't help it. Really, she looked at me as if I was an interesting morsel, and it affected me. I understand you might be upset, miss, but please do remain calm. Lieutenant Sachs stepped forward, took the woman's attention away from me, and I could breathe freely once more. In fact, you might be able to help us. Is there any reason you can think of for the kidnappers to take your child? No. What is being done to rescue Marika? Something about the woman's answer, maybe the quickness of it, made me narrow my eyes, and I knew I wasn't the only one who found it interesting. Sachs tilted his head, pondered on the brunette. Would you come with me, Miss Parker? I'm afraid I can't tell you any specifics about the case, but every scrap of information you can give me might help us find your daughter. The woman inhaled and exhaled, and it was obvious she wanted nothing more than to search for her daughter, but eventually nodded at the lieutenant, gestured for him to move. My lips almost twitched at it. There was obviously a commanding presence to the woman, and not even Sachs seemed immune to it. Then her eyes were on me. She looked at me over her shoulder as she walked away, and my breath caught. Once more. Something about those green eyes intimidated me and intrigued me. All at once, and I couldn't look away from them, only got free of their hold when the woman looked away. You okay? Evan asked, reaching out and putting one hand on my shoulder, and I jerkily nodded. Yes, I'm fine. I couldn't stop myself from looking towards where Parker had left, through my heart beating faster than normal, the image of her eyes still on my mind. Surprised me how much I wanted to see the woman again, feel her eyes on me. Despite how much they intimidated me, I should ignore that sensation. It wasn't as if I would ever see her again, but something inside of me seemed to think this would just be the first of many times our paths crossed. Chapter 2. I had expected to be dropped from the case when we returned to the precinct, but that was not what happened. Evan was assigned to a homicide that happened. In the meanwhile, while I was called to a meeting with all the detectives that remained in the kidnapping investigation. We have an idea of who's behind the kidnapping. Lieutenant Sachs didn't waste any time, let his voice echo throughout the room. His tone showed he was serious and obviously worried, and it was easy to understand why. The chief of police was in attendance, though I doubted he would intervene, and he wasn't the only stranger there. What must have been feds were seated against one of the walls, and it surprised me that they hadn't taken over the investigation yet, but there must have been some reason for it. One of the kids is the son of Ivan Martov, a man our friends at the FBI and the DEA have some knowledge of. He gestured towards the feds at that, and I started to understand why the Austin PD remained in charge of the investigation. If the two federal agencies were vying for who led the whole shindig, they might have settled for letting the police hold the fort for now, while they worked things out. He worked with the Russian mob in the past, laundering their money, and we caught him, but after he helped put away some priority targets, he was allowed to remain mostly free. We now know he hasn't exactly kept himself as clean as he should, and started laundering money for some of the cartels that work in the area. Something went south in an operation somewhere, and someone jumped The gun decided taking his kid was the way to make him squeal, but they made a mess of things. He gestured for one of the federal agents, and she stood and moved closer, taking Sax's place in front of the assembled detectives. The woman was in her mid-40s, 50s at the most, but her physique was still athletic enough that I wasn't surprised she remained a field agent. We have reason to believe this action wasn't exactly well thought out by the ones behind it, and that we now have a gang operating in the city holding a group of kids they weren't exactly prepared to. For all we know, they meant to bring Martov's kid to their contacts, smuggle him out. We have no idea why they took the other children if they panicked or thought they could make a buck. I'm certain they weren't prepared for the heat this brought on them, and I don't have to explain to you how dangerous that can be for those kids. It was easy for someone to do something foolish while afraid, and gang members weren't exactly people used to overthinking matters. I sighed. I had tried to avoid looking at images of the children, but their photos were in every local news, and the sight of them made something in my heart clench, especially the girl. Marika Parker was a beautiful child, and looking at her made me remember her mother. Every time I did that, I felt a shiver race down my back and then had to curse to myself because of it. The woman was gorgeous and I was drawn to her, but I needed to keep a hold of myself. Something about her was intimidating, and her daughter had been kidnapped. She certainly only had that on her mind. Which of the kids is Martov's? I didn't see who asked the question, but now that I heard it, I couldn't help but wonder about it as well. Was it Marika? Was Miss Parker involved with a criminal like Ivan Martov? Martov's kid used the name of James Martins at school. His father was using a fake identity, something we prepared for him. I don't have to say it, you're smart enough to understand this, Lieutenant. Sax stepped forward once more, and the federal agent used the opportunity to sit down. But I'm going to say it nonetheless. We can't let anything happen to those kids. We have to do our best to get them out safe and sound. I took a glimpse around and saw the effect his words had on my colleagues. Everyone wanted to save the children, catch the ones responsible for it. Almost certainly we'll find them. The ones responsible for the attack aren't the brightest members of society, but we have to find them quickly. Our careers are at stake. These kids' parents are rich and influential, and they can ruin our reputations if we don't do everything to save them. Once again, make no mistakes, leave no stone unturned. He let his eyes move over all of us once more, then nodded. When I call your names, come to me, and I'll give you your assignments. I let myself rest against the seat, not fooling myself. Lieutenant Sax would assign the more important tasks first, and certainly none of those tasks would be for me. It was natural. There were plenty of detectives with seniority over me, some of which had far more experience when it came to kidnappings and crimes of the kind, or with the local gangs. And most, I would be responsible for some menial task, little more. Cordero and Gordon. That's Veronica Gordon, not John. I blinked then, swiftly got to my feet, though I couldn't help but narrow my eyes a little at the same time. Sure, a couple of assignments had been given out already during the 5 minutes I waited, but I wasn't expecting to be called so soon. On the way to the desk Sax had against the corner of the room, I crossed paths with the man he called at the same time as me, and the two of us nodded at each other. He was tall, his skin was a very light mocha, and his eyes were dark. His appearance coupled with his surname made it obvious he was Hispanic. This is Veronica Gordon from Homicide. Sax introduced me with a gesture, then did the same to the other man. And this is Ramon Cordero from Vice. Now that the two of you know one another, I have an assignment for you. I need you to keep a watch on one of the local dives, a bar in the southern part of the city, the Devil's Horn. Ramon whistled. That place belongs to the Lunas. You think they're behind this? I'd heard of the Lunas, one of the more violent gangs in the city, one with plenty of contacts to the cartels past the border. It certainly wasn't the kind of people I wanted to be behind this kidnapping. We can't be fully sure, but it's a possibility. I don't expect you to find anything out of the ordinary, but keep a watch on their moves. He eyed the two of us. You were chosen for this because you can blend with your surroundings if need be. People won't think you'll be out of place in the area, but do be careful nonetheless. We are all aware of how dangerous they can be. Good luck. With that said, he pushed a binder Cordero's way, who picked it up. I almost snorted at the fact I was only chosen for the task for my appearance, which I suppose was just as valid as any other reason, in this case at least. I wasn't exactly a stunner. I was fit, but my appearance was average with shoulder-length brown hair and brown eyes. There must have been 100,000 other women like me in the city, so I suppose the lieutenant wasn't exactly wrong. I could easily blend in. Absently, my mind wandered to the brunette I met the day before, and I almost chuckled as I imagined Miss Parker trying to blend in. Cordero and I moved at once, stepping back from Sax's desk and moving towards the exit. How are we going to do this? He was looking into the documents in the binder, then glancing at me. All he gave us is an objective. Nothing here tells us how to do it, so I think we're free to come with whatever plan we want. Why make things complicated? I asked, shrugging. A simple stakeout should suffice. He only wanted us to keep an eye out for anything strange. There's no reason to make this more complicated than it needs to be. He groaned. I hate stakeouts. I found myself nodding. No one likes stakeouts. They were just one of the most boring parts of being a detective. Paperwork was less boring. Still, it needed to be done, and we did it. After gathering some supplies and making sure we would have backup in place in case anything went south and we needed the help, we used Cordero's car to drive close to the Devil's Horn. I almost scoffed at the name, couldn't help but think they were trying too hard. The bar stood almost at the limits of the city itself, with a small industrial area nearby. There was enough movement around for us not to seem too strange, and we were lucky to find a good spot for the car. And then the worst came. We settled down to wait. It was hard to describe how numbingly dull a stakeout could be. For one, even accompanied, I couldn't lose myself in conversation with my colleague. We couldn't get too distracted and miss anything after all. Oh, we still talked to one another. That was unavoidable, but it wasn't the same as if we were on a bar or a restaurant having a talk. Then there was the fact I didn't know Ramon Cordero, and our conversation was very stilted because of it. The hours went by, exhaustion set in, night fell, and I found myself sighing. For a moment all I wanted was a cigarette, but I had stopped smoking more than a year before, and I couldn't allow myself to fall into the temptation once again. It had been hard enough to let go of it the first time. Ramon whistled, and I blinked at him. He colored when he saw my glance, stammered a little. It was a somewhat amusing sight, especially because he must have been a decade older than I was. Sorry, that woman is dressed like a fucking movie star, and she's hot as hell. I glared at him for that, then followed his gesture and looked towards where he indicated. Almost immediately I swore. I know that woman. You do. He only blinked at me, then grinned. Think you can introduce me? I didn't say anything, undid my seatbelt and prepared to move out of the car. Only didn't because he grabbed my arm. What's going on? That's Miss Parker, the mother of the little girl that was kidnapped. He blinked at me, released me almost immediately, and moved to follow me. Couldn't be a coincidence. By the time we caught sight of her once more, she was entering the Devil's Horn, and we exchanged a glance, hesitating. Should we follow her or not? The moment a man was thrown through the doors, there was only one choice. Call for backup. I moved in, not listening to Cordero's orders to stop. Couldn't help myself really. My body seemed to move on its own, and I grabbed my weapon and held it safely in my hands, prepared to use it if needed. The half a minute it took me to cross the distance into the Devil's Horn seemed to last for much longer than it should, and I wanted to get in, but I stopped to study the man that had been thrown out, saw his tattoos, noticed how still he was, and reached down and pressed a couple of fingers against the side of his throat, breathing a little easier when I realized he was simply knocked out and not dead. I got to my feet, moved to the broken door, looked into the bar, not quite knowing what I would find, hoping Miss Parker was well. What I saw then made me blink. It was the only way I had to process the sight. Bodies were thrown a little all over the place, some of the men and women groaning, others completely silent and looking so pale I feared they might be dead. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand how these men and women could be laid low so quickly. I couldn't understand where Miss Parker was. And then I heard a scream from deeper into the bar, moved forward, found a small door leading into the back of the place, and barely hesitated before going through it, wondering if I should wait for Cordero or not. There was an entrance to a basement in the back, one that wasn't in any of the plans the lieutenant gave us, and I hesitated once more, then moved when I heard a cry coming from it. This wasn't like the pained cry from before. This seemed a child's cry, and there was no time to be wasted. Almost immediately after getting down, I found two of the missing boys holding each other against the corner of the room, their wide eyes on something else. When I followed their line of sight, I gaped just as much as they did. Miss Parker held a gang member against the wall of the basement, one hand on his throat, holding him up seemingly without effort. The man was taller than she was, his arms were twice as broad as hers, but no matter how much he tried, he couldn't free himself from the grip she had on him. "Where is my daughter?" Her voice made me shiver once more, though this time it was in something like dread. It terrified me really, both how cold and how calm it was, as if the woman was asking about something superfluous. She wasn't. I had seen the rage in her eyes back at the school. I could only imagine how much she loved her daughter. I wasn't the only one affected by it. The gang member renewed his efforts to free himself, opened his mouth, and Miss Parker released her grip just slightly, allowed him to breathe in and out. "She's not here," the man said, then coughed. "But she was." The way Miss Parker talked showed she was sure of it, and the man didn't try to deny her. "She was, but I had nothing to do with it. It was that cabron one. He was the one behind this mess, and then he brought the kids here, wanted me to help him. I told him to fuck off, tried to take the kids. I was going to free them. I swear." Parker tightened her grip then, and his words got choked. "What about Marika? My daughter? One and his men wouldn't let me take the other boy, and the girl clung to him, didn't want to leave him alone, and they decided to take her with them. That's all. I swear I wanted nothing to do with this." The man strained again, tried to free himself once more. Something that almost seemed a growl escaped from Miss Parker's mouth, and she pulled her hand back, dragging the man with it, and then pushed him hard against the wall once more. I flinched at the cracking sound that echoed through the room when his head hit the wall, at the manner in which he dropped down once the brunette released him. I flinched again when the woman turned to me, and I made to raise my weapon, part of me fearing for my life, another telling me I needed to arrest her, needed to stop her, but the moment her eyes met mine I froze. "Detective," the word escaped out of her mouth as if it was a purr, and she seemed to strut as she moved closer to me. "I thought I had noticed your presence." So confounded by her gaze, I didn't even question her words, how she put them. My mouth opened and closed a couple of times before I was able to make the question I wanted to. "What are you doing here?" That wasn't the only thing I wanted to know, but with her coming closer to me like that, I could barely think. She didn't say anything for a while, just moved closer and closer, until she was close enough to reach out and caress my face. I wouldn't be able to do anything to stop her. She could have done worse as well, and I wouldn't be able to defend myself. My mind was a mess. I could barely process what she had done, her strength and brutality. I could barely breathe with her so close to me. Her eyes drew me in and made me want to drown myself in them, and I swallowed past the sudden block in my throat, opened my mouth and closed it when she smiled at me. Then she brushed past me, our shoulders rubbing for only an instant, but it was enough to warm me all over. It took me a moment to gather myself, to turn and prepare to raise my weapon at Miss Parker, and in the end I stopped before doing it when I saw her crouch down in front of the boys she rescued. "This nice lady," Miss Parker's voice was soft, tender, and once more I felt my body react to it and hated myself for it. The brunette was dangerous, and I needed to be very careful around her. "Is a detective, and she's going to make sure you'll get home to your families." The kids nodded at her, and it was adorable, and I couldn't help but put my weapon away when the woman stretched to her full height and smiled at me. The sounds of steps coming down the basement stairs made me turn and raise my weapon once more, and I sighed in relief when I realized it was only Cordero. He looked from the kids to Miss Parker to the thug the other woman knocked out and blinked. What happened here? No matter how much I wanted to, I didn't know what to tell. Chapter 3. You can't let her leave like that, Lieutenant. I'm not one to usually get angry, but it was hard to believe what Sax was telling me. It wasn't as if I wanted to see Miss Parker imprisoned. I intellectually understood her position, and I could only imagine what I might do to rescue my child if I had one and she was taken. It still didn't change the fact that Miss Parker took a very big risk, that she killed at least 2 of the gang members that had been inside Devil's Horn, and that 2 others might not make it. It didn't change the fact she scared me, that a woman like her shouldn't have been able to do what she did. I couldn't help but question myself about who she was. I refused to believe she was simply some rich housewife. No such woman would have been able to do what she did. In truth, I doubted anyone could have done what she did so quickly and thoroughly. Somehow, she had disabled 7 combatants in less than a minute, sent one of them through the door so hard they broke, and all of it without giving them the chance to grab a weapon and fire on her. Didn't seem possible. And I knew I wasn't the only one that felt like that. Most of those that came to me to talk about it couldn't believe it, but there was no denying the facts. You think I want to let her go, Gordon? I don't have a choice. We would be crucified if we tried holding her for this while all the press out there is calling her a hero. Sachs shook his head, sighed. And sincerely I can understand them. I don't like it, but those she killed were gangbangers and she rescued 2 of the missing kids with her actions. Part of me doesn't want her to get punished for it, especially when I can understand why she did it. I bit my lower lip. Truth was, I felt just like he did. I understand why she did it. I might have done something like it in her place, but that wasn't the main problem here. How had she done it? Rationally, I could understand that maybe it didn't matter at the moment. It was something that could be figured out later, but I couldn't help but be intimidated by Miss Parker, wanted something to explain why. Right now, Sachs continued when I didn't say anything in reply, we have the mayor breathing down the chief's neck, and in turn on my neck, wondering why. We have detained the woman who saved his nephew. We have the press painting most of us as a bunch of incompetent fools who are attacking a hero, and I have a prosecutor who is not even considering pressing any kind of charges against Freya Parker. There's nothing I can do. She's going to walk free for now. Her name seemed to echo inside my mind for a few moments. I hadn't even known it before, and I shook my head trying to get rid of those thoughts. She must know something about the kidnappers, someone who could give her information about them. How could she have found them otherwise when the entire police force failed to? He didn't try to deny my words, and I continued. Let me talk to her. Her lawyer is going to arrive at any moment to finalize the details. His voice trailed off, and I knew he wanted to tell me off, but if Miss Parker told us anything that could be used to track down the missing children, I can talk to her off camera, try to connect with her. I won't be threatening her, don't worry. Not that I thought that would have any effect. The brunette had barely reacted when we put the cuffs on her. She had showed no fear before facing a dangerous gang. I wouldn't fool myself. I wouldn't be able to scare her, but maybe she would open herself to me. Sachs studied me for a while longer. If you're caught, I had nothing to do with it, understood? Yes, sir. He moved away and I watched him go, then hesitated for a few moments before starting to walk to the entrance of the interrogation room where Miss Parker was. I hesitated once more outside the door. I could be risking my career by bothering her like this. I was terrified of her as well, and yet something about her drew me in. I couldn't get her damned green eyes out of my mind. I couldn't ignore how my heart seemed to beat faster when she was close. I wanted to find the other 2 missing kids, and she might have some clue. There. In her place, I would probably tell whatever I knew to the authorities. But then I couldn't have done what she did, and she might believe she could more easily rescue her daughter working alone. Drawing a big breath, I entered the room, tried to put a smile in my lips. Almost immediately it vanished, right about when she looked me in the eyes. She was the one that smiled then, and my breath caught in my throat. We meet again, Detective. Miss Parker, I started, trailed off when she tilted her head at me. I don't know your name. The request was implicit in her words, and I found myself unable to deny her. Victoria Gordon, though most call me Ronnie. Babbling was something I hadn't done since I was a teenager, but something about the woman seated at the table made me want to babble, made me nervous as I had never been before. She slowly shook her head. I will call you by your first name. It is a beautiful name for a beautiful woman. I flushed. I couldn't help it, really. And the smirk she graced me with told me that was exactly the reaction she had been hoping to get out of me. I straightened just slightly and tried to be as serious as I could. It was obvious she was playing with me, but I needed to understand what she knew and how she had found where the kids were stashed. Miss Parker, I need you to tell me how you found where those children were. Why? I blinked. I'm sorry. Why do you need to know that? Her words didn't seem mocking, but I couldn't help but think they couldn't be anything but. Isn't it obvious? To save the remaining children, your daughter included. If you were truly worried about my daughter's fate, you wouldn't have arrested me and made me lose my time, Victoria. Her words seemed mild, but there was an undercurrent of anger that ran through them and made me shake. Just a little. You're lucky those children were there, that your partner was there, and that you are a beautiful woman, or I might have done something that I might have regretted. I took a step back. I didn't even think about it. She intimidated me, made me fear. I wouldn't delude myself. I wasn't safe near her. Not after what she showed she could do. I didn't know if she was some kind of super spy or super soldier or whatever, and in the end it really didn't change things. And here, so close to her, I was at her mercy, and the way her green eyes roved over me told me that maybe I should have turned my back on her and fled right then and there, let her lawyer get her out and hopefully never see her again. And yet, I don't understand what came over me really, but I just swallowed and looked down, almost bowing my head at her. My heartbeat quickened when I heard the screech of her chair against the floor, when I heard her steps taking her closer to me. I swallowed when her hand, delicately pressed against my chin, made me look up. She smiled at me, leaned closer, so close her front brushed against mine, and I felt my skin break into goosebumps. A wave of desire inundated my body, made me want, and I gasped as she brushed her thumb against my lips, the motion almost possessive. I didn't understand what was happening to me, why I was reacting to her so. Her smile widened and I shuddered. If only I had the time, she said for a moment, even leaned further in, then stepped back, leaving me with my heart pounding. The woman didn't say anything else, walked past me and out the door, leaving me confused and unbalanced, and questioning my own sanity. That was something I would find myself doing plenty of times over the following days. Chapter 4. The day after I talked to Freya Parker on that interrogation room, I was taken out of the case. Oh, I wasn't the only one, with the certainty of who had kidnapped the kids, and with 2 of them already rescued, the case lost some urgency, and I was given a few days off. I couldn't help but think Miss Parker had something to do with it, though maybe I was just projecting. What I did next was foolish, though. Instead of using those days to rest, maybe go out for the weekend or something, I started following Miss Parker. If I was caught, I would probably get fired and ruin my career, but I didn't think about that. No, all I could think about was the brunette. It was insane, really. Every time I thought about her, I became unbalanced and my heart started beating faster. It certainly wasn't normal, but more and more I was convinced very little about Miss Parker was normal. Finding the woman's address wasn't hard, and it surprised me a little that she didn't live in a mansion somewhere. Oh, her house was quite nice, and it certainly wasn't cheap, but it wasn't a mansion. Nor was Freya Parker married. As I expected her to be, she was a widow. That shouldn't have mattered, shouldn't have made a difference. It did. Became easier to think something might happen between us, though my memories of our previous encounter certainly helped there. I had been too overwhelmed at the time to process it, but the woman flirted with me. Oh, she had also threatened me in a way, and her threats were certainly terrifying, but I couldn't get past the fact she called me beautiful and looked at me as if she wanted to devour me. Maybe without that I would put this entire situation behind me, leave her be, and forget about her. Even as I thought that, I knew I was lying to myself. It wasn't just the mystery of Miss Parker that made me follow her, it was also her daughter. Little Marika Parker was a beautiful child, and she certainly didn't deserve to die, or be away from her family. That girl deserved to be rescued, and I didn't doubt that Miss Parker would try to save her. Certainly it was foolish to think so. Rationality told me it wasn't as if the woman would once again find something the police couldn't. And yet, the brunette must have criminal contacts of some kind. It was the only explanation for her to have been able to find those children before. That didn't explain her combat prowess, or anything about her really. I shook my head once more. Maybe it didn't make sense, but I could almost bet Miss Parker would find her daughter again, and I wanted to be there. It could help. I could make sure nothing happened to both of them. Maybe I was just fooling myself. I stayed in my car, parked near the entrance of Miss Parker's home, waiting for any sign of the woman. And when night fell and I watched her leave, I felt like I had hit the jackpot. There were 1,000 possible reasons for her to get out of the house, but I didn't doubt that the woman was in search of her daughter. What I saw over the following hour confused me, I could admit. Miss Parker drove to near the Devil's Horn, stepped out of her vehicle and stood outside. For a few moments her head tilted back, almost as if she was concentrating. Didn't understand what she was doing exactly, but it didn't take her long to get in her car and move once again, and I didn't care much, not until she stopped a couple of minutes later and repeated the process. Part of me wondered if maybe she knew I was there, was doing this to distract me, but that didn't make much sense. I didn't doubt her priority was finding her daughter. She wouldn't be losing time trying to make me lose my own time. No, whatever Miss Parker was doing, she was doing it to find her daughter, even if I didn't understand how exactly. And then 2 hours after she left her home, the brunette found something. Noticed it the moment she tensed after getting out of her car, in how her head turned and looked towards the west, and her hands tightened into fists. She didn't even bother to close her car's door before starting to walk, and I could only blink at it for a few moments, then parked my car badly and moved after her. It was a struggle to keep up with her, and I didn't know how I didn't lose her from sight before she entered a rundown apartment building. I hesitated before following after her. The aspect of the place, the graffiti adorning its walls, that seemed to indicate a certain gang presence in the area. Everything about the situation made me nervous, but I didn't want to let Parker face it alone. For a moment I almost called for backup, but then remembered my position. I was supposed to be having a day off. I certainly shouldn't be following a person of interest in a kidnapping, and, well, nothing happened yet. If I called for backup when there was no need for it, I would be ruining my career for nothing. Breathing in and out, I straightened, grabbed my firearm, and moved carefully. Almost immediately I realized I wouldn't be finding Miss Parker unless I got very lucky. The building was several stories high. There were ruined apartments all over the place, and I could lose several hours inside without meeting anyone of interest. And then a scream came from a floor or two above me. I didn't hesitate, didn't waste time, found the stairs and moved up as quickly as I could, sometimes climbing 2 steps at a time. More screams followed the first, and though for the most part they were the screams of adult men, when I got closer to their location I heard the scream of what could only be a little girl. The scene I found when I walked into one of the apartments of the 3rd floor made me freeze in place for a few moments. The bodies of unconscious men were strewed a little all over the place, much like what happened in the Devil's Horn, and once more I saw Freya Parker do something that seemed impossible. Was impossible, but that didn't stop her from grabbing the steel chain that held the 2 kidnapped children against one of the walls of the room and pull it apart as if it was made of styrofoam. I could only gape at it, not quite understanding what I was seeing. The brunette looked back at me, smirked, then leaned down and pulled her daughter into her arms, held her tight. The young girl held her back, crying just a little as she did it. The sight made a pang hit my heart, and I ignored the impossibility of what I had just seen, looked away from the 2, gestured for the other kid to come to me. The boy was visibly scared, and unlike Marika he also seemed scared of their rescuer, though he was more than willing to come to me. And then I heard a noise, turned around and saw one of the men that had been unconscious raise a weapon and pointed at Freya Parker, at her daughter. Didn't think later I would regret not just raising my weapon and shooting him, but in that moment I didn't think. I took a step forward and called to him, "Put the weapon down." He didn't seem to hear me, kept targeting Miss Parker, who pushed her daughter behind her and raised to her full height. I didn't think. I crossed the shooter's path, put myself in front of the other woman. The noise of the pistol was deafening, and I only realized I had been hit when I felt a wetness run down my front. My legs failed me and I fell to my knees, and I couldn't understand why I was fine. Then I looked down and saw the blood and realized I was anything but fine. He didn't get a chance to shoot me again. Miss Parker moved past me quick and hard, reached him, and then part of me wanted to believe I was just seeing things, and maybe my lack of blood could help explain that, but there was no denying what I saw. Her hands changed into something far more bestial and dangerous, claws far bigger than they had any right to be, substituting her nails, and those claws sank into the man that shot me without difficulty. My sight wavered as I finished falling to the ground, and I blinked, and when my eyes opened again she was there against me, smiling down at me. "We need to stop meeting in such seedy places, Victoria." Her words made me chuckle for some reason, even if I didn't find the statement very funny. The motion made me wince in pain, and she only made me feel more of it when she pressed her hands against my wound hard. "Marika, call 911. The little blonde girl grabbed her mother's phone and did as the older woman said, but I could barely focus on her. Slowly my eyelids dropped down and I only regained a little bit of focus when Miss Parker shook me, making me look up at her. My eyes met her green orbs and I stilled in place. "Focus, Victoria. You're not allowed to die right now, not after taking a bullet for me. She pressed harder against my wound and a pained whine escaped my mouth. Stay here with me. My heartbeat skyrocketed at that, and I could only nod at her. Her lips twitched into a smile and I wanted to kiss them so much I almost leaned in. Ignoring my wound, somehow I retained some amount of common sense, tried to hold still as much as I could, focused on the brunette. Freya Parker was a truly gorgeous woman, even dying in her arms as it seemed. I wanted her, wanted to know her, wanted to understand what she was. Didn't even think before opening my mouth. What are you? She froze only for an instant, but I noticed. With my sole attention on her, I couldn't have missed it, even as weakened as I was. I didn't know what to think. It was one thing to fantasize that maybe she wasn't human, that there was obviously something about her that made her different, quite another for her to give me an indication she wasn't. That doesn't matter now, Victoria. She caressed my face and I leaned into her touch. I couldn't help it. Hold on, fight through this and I'll tell you. There was nothing I wanted more, but my waning strength quickly vanished and I closed my eyes, unable to answer her. Victoria? Victoria. Chapter 5. I woke up eventually. That surprised me. When I closed my eyes, I thought that was it, I would die from that wound, but it seemed I got lucky. It was one of the only two things I had reason to feel lucky about when I woke. By the time I recovered my senses, almost a month had passed, a month where I had been in a coma and many things had happened. For one, I was hailed as a hero, and I only truly understood the reason why when I read the news about it, and I realized Freya Parker had said I had been the one to find the missing children. That was a complete fabrication and not one any of my colleagues believed, but they weren't willing to rock the boat. I still suffered for it. My bosses weren't happy, and they told me that outright. If that had been it, I might have ended up with a stalled career, knowing I would never get promoted again. They weren't happy with me, knew something more was going on, but they couldn't exactly move against someone the media was calling a hero. Unfortunately, that was when I had another bout of bad news. The bullet had messed me up more than I imagined. As it entered my gut and came out of my back, it brushed against my spine. It wasn't much, but it damaged the nerves. Not enough to be permanent, the doctors told me, but it might take me years of physical therapy to recover completely. I could walk, though I was still weak from the coma, but with a limp, and I should always use at least one crutch. With all of that, my bosses had no problem pushing me into an early retirement, one which I had no other choice but accepting if I didn't want to risk making things worse on myself. Sincerely, I might have gone insane from all that, done something I shouldn't, if it wasn't for the other thing that made me lucky. Freya and Marika Parker. Ronnie, Marika said as she entered my room, bouncing towards me, and I couldn't help but smile at the girl, then chuckle a little as she threw herself atop of my bed, though the motion did make me wince a little in pain. Marika. I reached out and caressed the golden curls, marveling at them, at just how cute the 7-year-old could be. She was about to turn 8, and it was almost strange how much I was looking forward to it. I already told you to be careful, Freya warned her daughter as the blonde finished climbing into the bed and pressed against my side, my arm moving around her frame almost immediately, making sure I could hold her close to me. Ronnie doesn't mind, do you? Marika turned her big green eyes on me so similar to her mother's they gave me pause for a few moments. No, I don't, though my stitches might. I chuckled as I said the words, and the little girl chuckled with me. Then I turned my eyes towards her mother. I met Freya's gaze and my heart started beating faster. I don't understand why you prefer to be called by that ridiculous nickname when you have such a beautiful name. The brunette sat on my bed, close enough that she brushed against my leg as she did it, which in turn made my body burn. I couldn't help it really, she always had that effect on me, and I didn't think anything could change that. Her smile told me she was perfectly aware of it, and I had to resist the urge to glare at her just a little. Still, my glare softened into something a little more tender after a few moments. Freya had been at my side since I woke from my coma, and I could kiss her for it. Well, I wanted to kiss her since the first time I saw her, but the way she had been there for me made the extreme attraction I had for her become something else. I hesitated to call it love, but truth was that I couldn't think of a word that fit better. Officially, Freya Parker and her daughter had been visiting me as a thank you for rescuing the little one. Both me and Freya knew better. She had been the one that found the gang members, and her daughter somehow, she was the one that rescued Marika, and the only thing I did was get shot. Well, got shot while putting myself in front of them, something Freya hadn't allowed me to forget. I didn't know why she didn't simply go on and ignored what happened to me, but I was thankful for it. I didn't have family. My parents had died when I was a teenager, and both of them had been an only child. I had friends, though not many and not very close, and many of those friends were my colleagues, and they knew something strange had been going on, and the bosses were throwing me out on the street with only a pension that colored a person's perceptions, and the few visits I had from that corner of my life were a little awkward. Freya, she insisted I called her, that had been there for me and Marika as well. The hospital was being paid by the brunette, and no matter how much I tried to fight her on it, she hadn't allowed me to reject her help. I was thankful for it. Without the doctors she got me, I might have not recovered as quickly as I did, might very well have ended up with a permanent loss of mobility. Sincerely, I didn't quite know what to think about it all. Their help had been invaluable. I loved spending time with Marika, and I was infatuated with Freya. I couldn't deny it, no matter how much a certain part of me might want to. I didn't know why the woman was doing this for me, if she was only trying to make sure I wouldn't tell anyone what I saw, or if there was more to it. I hoped there was more to it, and I was afraid there wasn't, that this was only her attempt at keeping me quiet. I had avoided asking her about it, but I couldn't avoid it anymore. My focus turned to Marika and her stream of babble, and I found myself smiling at it, letting the blonde continue until she had to pause to breathe, and then reached out, caressed her face. "Can I talk to your mother alone for some moments?" Marika only blinked at me, then nodded. Dutifully, the blonde got out of the bed, waved her hand at me, and moved out, telling her mother she was going to the cafeteria at the same time. Freya sighed, then turned to me, and her green eyes gave me pause. It wasn't like it was at first. They didn't intimidate me exactly, but they still had an effect on me. I loved them, wouldn't mind spending the rest of my life looking into them. Couldn't be, though. "I think we need to talk." "What about?" Freya's tone of voice seemed amused, and the woman leaned closer to me, so close that I couldn't help but lick my lips and look down at the cleavage of her dress, marveling at it. It wasn't my fault clothes that tight shouldn't be allowed, and she knew perfectly well the effect she had on me. Something I realized about the brunette during the time she had been helping me was that she was a complete flirt. With me, at least. She never missed a chance to tease me, liked to draw my eyes to her, and her innuendos. Well, it was a good thing I was somewhat debilitated, or I might have just lost my patience and pushed her against a wall, kissed her until neither of us could breathe, which might have been a little awkward seeing as Marika was always with us, but I don't think the little girl would terribly mind if me and her mother became something more. I shook my head, tried to regain my focus. I couldn't let her distract me that easily. "I think you know." She only tilted her head at me, and I glared at her, hating that she would force me to put it into words. "I remember quite clearly what I saw after getting shot. I saw you killing that man using claws that grew out of your hand." "That might not be the more correct way of putting it," Freya interrupted me with a chuckle, and I could only blink at her. "Claws didn't grow out of my hand. My hand shifted into something that had claws. A slim difference, but one you should be aware of." My mouth opened and closed at the easy manner she admitted to the impossible thing I had seen. "What are you?" What else could I ask her after she admitted to something like that? "What do you think I am?" "How could I possibly know that?" I countered, crossing my arms under my chest. She glanced down at that, smiled at me, and moved closer, and I found myself drawing a more ragged breath. "Is it really that important for you to know what I am?" she asked me, one of her hands against my upper leg, and my body seemed to burn at her touch. Was it that important to know? Maybe. I liked her. I loved her daughter. I was attracted to her as I had never been to any other person before. Did it really matter if she wasn't fully human? I wanted to say no, but I just didn't know the answer to that. I looked at her. She saw my dilemma and stepped back. Her smile remained in place, though, so I didn't think she was displeased or anything. "I'm going to give you the answer you want tonight while we dine." I blinked at her. I'm still in the hospital, you know. Not for much longer." She shrugged, and the motion drew my attention to something south of her face. She noticed it, leaned forward a little to give me a better glimpse, and I reddened. "Your doctors are going to release you today into my care." "What?" You didn't think I would let you live on your apartment alone, did you? You need help, especially at first, and both Marika and I can give it to you. Don't worry, detective. Her words gained a teasing tone and her eyes burned with something I almost wanted to call desire. You'll have your own room, you won't have to sleep in my bed. Well, unless you would prefer to. Promise not to devour you in your sleep, not literally at least. She licked her lips. I understood her innuendo and blushed as red as a tomato. She laughed and the sound made me breathe a little easier, made my soul sing with joy. Now, before I give you a heart attack of some kind, I'm going to see what my hellion of a daughter is doing. Without another word, she turned and left, and I couldn't help but follow her with my eyes, appreciating her figure even as I tried to process what she told me. It was obvious she wouldn't take a no to her offer, if I indeed could call it an offer when she made it seem as if I didn't have a choice. And well, would I have chosen anything different? Rationally, I knew I would need help, especially at first. It would take time for me to recover my strength to be able to move without the crutches. I also had to admit the thought of spending more time with Freya made my heart beat a little faster. Before the brunette could return with her daughter in tow, the doctors came, told me I would be getting released that day. By the time Freya returned, I was already out of the bed, dressed, and holding onto my crutches, ready to leave. Marika didn't hesitate and stepped forward, pressed against my side to help me walk, and I smiled as I messed her hair, which in turn made her pout at me. My heart didn't settle during the entire trek to Freya's house. It was hard to believe it was happening to me, that I would be living with the brunette for a time. I mean, in truth, she was little more than a stranger, but I had been drawn to her from the first moment I saw her. I wanted her, and she didn't hide the fact she wouldn't mind having me. Still, as she led me to what would be my room, as she helped me settle in, I couldn't help but feel a little overwhelmed. Tomorrow I can help you go by your apartment and pack whatever you need. More like pack everything, I muttered, then explained when she narrowed her eyes at me. The apartment is rented, and my landlord is an ass. I doubt he'll care I paid late because I was in a coma. I just hope he didn't throw my stuff out. Perhaps it's better that way. There will be less of a reason for you to leave. Freya's eyes seemed to shine at those words, and I swallowed just a little. I got you a dress for our outing tonight. I can help you put it on later if you need. Or maybe you'll want the maid to help you. I wouldn't mind being the one. Her tone became lecherous and I reddened. Wait, you were serious about dinner? She only nodded at me and I blinked. She smiled, turned on her feet and left. Do be sure to rest for tonight, Victoria. I quite intend to tire you out. With those words, which made my cheeks burn red, she moved away and I didn't have time to say anything else. Despite how overwhelmed I was, I fell asleep the moment I laid down on top of the bed, clothes and all, and I only woke when someone shook me. Get up, Ronnie. Marika's voice had an urgent tint to it, and I immediately regained my awareness, leaning up and gazing around the blonde, thinking there was something wrong. You're going to be late to your date with Mother if you don't. The moment I processed the girl's words, I gaped. She didn't waste any time. Before moving to the closet against the wall and returning, holding a gray dress that was certainly too tight for me. Then she pushed it at me. I looked from it to the blonde and back again and realized this must have been the dress Freya mentioned earlier, but she had certainly made a mistake. Wouldn't fit. It did fit too well, even so well I could only imagine Freya had somehow taken my measurements while I was in a coma. It was the only explanation I found for it. The maid Anna helped me dress, though I tried to tell her and Marika that I could do it on my own, but it certainly was a little less painful to let them help me with that. At the end of the whole process, once I let Anna and Marika put a little makeup on me and brush my hair, I looked at myself in the mirror and I couldn't recognize me. Well, if I was honest, it wasn't as radical a difference as that, but several little things combined made me seem far more attractive than I ever thought I was, and the dress. I blushed a little at how noticeable the dress made my curves, and I kind of wanted to see Freya's reaction to it. The other woman had always looked at me as if she wanted to devour me. I could only imagine how much more her look would scorch me if she saw me now. And I got my wish when Marika said I was ready, grabbed my hand and gently pulled, leading me through the house. I had only grabbed one of the crutches. I didn't think we would be walking long, and one was all that was needed for shorter walks. When Freya came into view, I gaped at her. Her red dress was basically mirror of my own, and I certainly liked how it fit her. Her generous curves were obvious, and even if the dress didn't show any skin it shouldn't, it was certainly tight against her frame, especially in her chest. I lost myself looking at that area and got embarrassed when she chuckled at me. I see that you like it. She let her hands move down her sides, leaned forward just a little, which only made her seem even more alluring. Her eyes on me made me become a little too conscious of how I was dressed, and I fidgeted just slightly. And I can say I quite enjoy what I'm seeing. I tried not to become overwhelmed by the situation. Anna, I'm leaving Marika in your capable hands. We shouldn't take too long. 2 or 3 hours at the most, and then we'll be back, Freya told the maid, who had joined us while we waited, and positioned herself behind the blonde girl. The brunette leaned in and pressed a quick kiss to her daughter's cheeks, caressed her face, then walked towards me, stopped and extended her arm. I put one of my arms in hers, the other holding onto the crutch. A stinging sensation made me grit my teeth when I took the first steps, and pain flared out, but it wasn't anything I couldn't endure. Still, Freya's grip helped, and the woman made sure we didn't move too fast, helped me into her car once we were outside. She was gentle about it, her hands felt soft against my body, and certain parts of me clenched in something that was almost like anticipation. The way her eyes seemed to light up at it made me think she had noticed, but couldn't be, could it? It didn't take long to reach our destination, a luxurious restaurant close to the center of the city, one I would have never thought to visit normally. We had a reservation because of course we did. How could I even think otherwise? With the woman at my side, we found ourselves seating in a mostly isolated table against one of the corners of the dining room. It was far enough away from any other table that we would have quite a bit of privacy, which was something I was sure she considered. She ordered for us, which ended up being a good thing seeing as I didn't recognize almost anything in the menu, and then we waited for the food to come. Despite the luxury of the place, our table wasn't too big. Freya was close enough that I could smell her perfume, and that scent coupled with the sight of her was making me crazy. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and tried to focus. Oh, I was certain she wanted to invoke that reaction in me, wanted to seduce me, and I certainly didn't mind the attempt, but I also wanted answers. I would be living with a other woman for a time. I didn't fear her. I didn't think she would do anything to harm me. If she wanted me dead, she could have simply let me die. When I was shot, no matter what she told me, I doubted I would run away. I wanted her too much. For that, I was starting to fall in love with her, and I was already enchanted by her daughter. I still wanted to know the truth. Dinner was marvelous, though I didn't have much of a mind to focus on the scents and flavors of the food we were offered. I couldn't take my eyes off Freya, and she knew it, smiled at me, looked at me as I looked at her. More than once, I almost opened my mouth to talk about what she was, and I always back down. You wanted to know what I am? Freya started after we got dessert, and I could only nod at the other woman. Maybe you'll find it hard to believe, but I'm a werewolf. My disbelief must have been obvious. You're kidding, right? There was a small smile in her lips, but she shook her head. No, I'm not. She fell silent after that, and I could only look at her and wait for the punchline. Slowly realized she was being serious. Then I gaped. There were only 2 options. She was either lying and playing around with me, or she was telling the truth, and there was much about the world I didn't know, and as I looked at her I realized she was probably telling the truth. I started breathing harder. I couldn't help it really. I was feeling overwhelmed, not quite knowing what to do. I only relaxed when I felt my hand on hers, when she reached atop the table and held it. Suddenly I had a different 1,000 questions to ask her, but I couldn't gather enough focus to ask any of them. The sudden tension over my frame made my wound pound a little, and I winced and shifted in place. I could help you with that. The seriousness in those words made me stare at the other woman. What do you mean? Freya pursed her lips. I could turn you into someone like me. Is that something that can be done? For a moment my curiosity overwhelmed. My pain made me focus my full attention on her. Not usually, but you're special. When I narrowed my eyes at her, she explained. Have you ever wondered why you're so drawn to me? Why you were drawn to me the first time you saw me? Wait, does you being a werewolf have anything to do with it? I was aware that the pull I felt for her was strong, and that I felt it from the moment I first saw her, but I hadn't imagined there might be another reason for it, other than pure attraction. After all, Freya was one of the most gorgeous women I had ever seen who wouldn't be attracted to her. It's only a conjecture from my part, but it explains the way I affect you. And the way you affect me. She continued, not answering me directly. I believe that one of your ancestors was a werewolf, and some of what makes us different passed down to you. And that would make me attracted to you? I didn't quite know what to think of the fact the attraction I felt for her might not be natural. Awkward. Certainly, though, would that also influence her attraction for me? Not exactly. You feel attracted to me because you think I'm attractive and you want me. This, and I stress that I might be wrong about it, would only make us feel a certain connection. Everything else is on us. There was plenty to process there, and I wanted to think better on it before continuing that line of inquiry. And so what, you can turn me into a werewolf? She hesitantly nodded. And that would make the pain go away? We're fast healers, it wouldn't take long for that wound to stop bothering you once you finish turning at least. There are dangers though, you could die from the process. I don't think you would, but there's a risk. Then maybe we should hold back on it for now. Oh, the thought of being healed just like that, of regaining the physical form I had before being shot. Or even a better one, if the physical displays that I had seen Freya do showed anything, was very tempting, but I wasn't willing to risk my life for it. I would recover, the doctors seemed certain of it. It was a matter of time and hard work, and now I would have all the time in the world to do it. Was being a werewolf what allowed you to find those kids? First I had imagined she might have some criminal connections that helped her there, but now I couldn't say for sure. I remembered the night I followed her, how she would leave the car and turn her head high, almost as if she was some kind of bloodhound following a scent. She only nodded at me. Now then, should we return home? She said eventually, and I realized I had been lost in my own thoughts for a few minutes. I quite like the dessert, but I'm wondering if I might taste something sweeter when I get home. I truly hated how easily she made me blush, and my embarrassment almost made me turn my head away, but somehow I persevered, faced her head on. What makes you think that's a possibility? My voice didn't come out as shakily as I feared it might, and I congratulated myself for it. The hunger that took over her features and her sharp smile almost undid me, and I swallowed. Victoria, in my life I learned that wasting time dancing around is just that, wasting time. I want you. A shiver ran down my back at that. And you want me. Why waste any more time dancing around it? Let me take you home, let me put you between my sheets, and I'll give you a night you'll never forget. Let me make you mine. I swallowed again, unable to look away from her green eyes, from the emotions that radiated from them. Was it so surprising that all I could do was nod? Freya didn't lose any time. She paid the bill, helped me up and into her car, and when we arrived at her house she helped me out, gently led me towards her room. Surprised me, if I was honest, with the hunger and want I saw in her. I expected her to carry me into her bed and ravage me, but she was gentle, soft. She was conscious of my wound and the effect it had on me, and let me move at my own pace. And then I found myself seated at the edge of her bed, fidgeting as I looked away. I only looked back at her when I heard her dress fall to the floor. The temptation became too great. I almost moaned at the sight. Clad in lingerie that was as red as the dress she had been wearing, Freya looked like a goddess, and I wanted her. I wanted to move to her and run my hands over her body. I wanted to kiss every inch of her flesh and hear her moan as I did it. I made to move and winced, my wound bothering me once again, and she was the one that came to me, pushed me down on the bed and climbed atop of me, and then her lips were against mine in the most searing kiss of my life. There was no holding back with a woman like her. My hands fell over her frame, and I touched her all over, running my digits over her back at first, loving how she moaned when I reached her lower back, and then up over her sides, against her ribs. Freya started kissing me harder when that happened, and she pressed so hard against me that it pained me. She moved back even before I protested. Sorry, she said, her voice rough. Don't apologize for it. I reached for her, pulling her down once more. I wanted this even if it hurt. I wanted her, and I would have her. My hands wandered down as she kissed me once more, though this time down her front, until I could cup her bra-covered flesh. She moaned at it, and I moaned when she paid me in kind, and her hands grabbed onto my rear. She was far gentler getting me naked than I thought she would be. Her hands gently pulled down my dress and my undergarments, slowly bearing me, her mouth leaving a trail of kisses over every inch of flesh she revealed, until I burned with need for her. When her mouth latched onto one of my nipples, I thought I would go insane with the pleasure, and I arched towards her, wincing. When that bothered my wound, she didn't stop, but she put her hands on my waist and pushed me down, made it so that I couldn't move in a way that would hurt me, and kept doing everything she could to drive me wild. I only hesitated once, when she made to grab my panties and pull them down. I held onto them instead, and she smiled at me, moved up my body, and only stopped when she was kissing my lips, leaned back and unclasped her bra, letting it fall. The sight of her bare chest was too much, and I didn't resist. The temptation leaned in, and this time I was the one using my mouth on her rosy peaks. The sounds that came out of her mouth, the way she gripped me and allowed her hands to glide over my flesh. It was too much, and when her hand moved south, again I didn't hesitate, allowed her to do whatever it was she wished with me. There was no hesitation as her hand teasingly played with the flesh above my panties, nor did I move away when she moved down, beneath my undergarments, and played with my curls. I moaned when one of her digits reached my core, and she touched me like that. She made me see stars. Her caresses were tender, her fingers experienced, and she drew pleasure out of me as I never imagined it could be done. And in time I reached my limit. I came, and I held her as I did it. Didn't stop there, not even close. Once she made me enjoy, she finished bearing me, kissed me on the lips, and trailed down my body, and before I had fully recovered from the first orgasm, she started feasting from me, making me enjoy again. When I came the second time, I trashed and hurt myself, though only a little, but she climbed my body and held me, kissed me, and we stayed like that for a few minutes, just enjoying each other's close presence. And then I decided I wanted more. I leaned down and suckled on one of her nipples, allowed my hands to move down, and bared her completely. She let me do it, even helped, and laid down on the bed, spreading her legs and letting me take a place between them. For that, I made sure to give her as much joy as I could. There was no describing the taste of her, or how nice it felt to hear her moans and see her trash as I pleased her. By the time I had succeeded on my task, I knew this was the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. We kissed again. She put her arms around me and held me tightly, our bodies fitting against one another's as if we were made that way, and I knew she felt like me. Epilogue. Over the following months, I slowly recovered my previous form. It wasn't easy. I had to spend several hours a day doing physical therapy. I had to get over the pain, but I succeeded at it, mostly thanks to Marika and Freya. The two of them were always ready to support me, give me an encouraging word when I needed it. I didn't want to become a werewolf to heal myself. It didn't seem fair. Somehow, Freya understood, or at least she said she did, and everything between us was fine. We quite liked one another. I could probably say we loved one another, though I was a little hesitant in that. And then I understood why. She had given me the offer to be a werewolf, and I reconsidered the matter. Werewolves didn't always give birth to werewolves. Marika wasn't one, and Freya told me she didn't intend to make her daughter one. And yet I soon realized that part of Freya was lonely. From what she told me, werewolves were close to extinct, and there wasn't another in 100 miles of us. My lover, despite everything, was lonely, and I couldn't bear it. When I realized it, I went to her, asked her to turn me. She questioned me, made sure I was certain of what I was asking her, but I could recognize the excitement in her eyes, knew she was happy about it. That made sure I knew I had taken the right choice. The change was hard, violent, and painful, but I survived, and I recovered quickly after that. And then I truly understood my lover. I truly understood Freya and what she had been missing. She had been incomplete despite her daughter, despite having me. She had been missing a mate, a werewolf, to be hers. I was more than happy to be the one to complete her. I wanted to be the one to complete her and have her be the one that completed me. And for that alone I would never regret becoming a werewolf. And I certainly would never regret being hers.